first of all, the Bodhisattva Bhumi itself is a piece of a larger work called the Yogacara Bhumi, which is a separate corpus of writings that, according to tradition, flowed out of those original 5 teachings that Asanga received from Maitreya. That's the connection between them in a broader sense. More specifically, if you examine the structure of Bodhisattva Bhumi and the structure of the Sutra Alankara in particular, the order and the topics, the subject matter, they parallel rather closely. So it's clear that the Bodhisattva Bhumi is a kind of commentary on the Sutra Alankara. It's an opportunity to learn about the path in a more precise way, in a more detailed way, and in that way to become more informed. By that I mean to have a fuller grasp of specific practices. Bodhisattva Bhumi, probably, as far as I know, in Tibetan, classical Tibetan literature, by that I mean what was translated from India, has the most comprehensive description of, for instance, the 6 paramitas, and particularly the first 3, generosity, morality, patience, and also the 4th. That is really, in terms of explaining what those practices are, what its different forms are, and in doing so, presenting instruction that can become the basis of one's meditation. Many people can tick off what the practices are, but if you have to sit down and actually cultivate them, you may need more resources. So it represents that kind of resource. The Bodhisattva Bhumi is, I would say, compared to Bodhicharya Avatara, for instance, is a little bit more of a reference work. It's something that you can, read, look at, and sort of clarify certain points, that kind of thing. In my opinion, the Bodhicharya Avatara is more direct in terms of the actual practices. My familiarity with the work is mainly through the way it is introduced and included in the Lamrim teaching. So as you go through the various topics, for example, the paramitas, which are a big part of, the separate chapters for them in the poem itself, ways of describing those practices are presented by the author, in this case Tsongkhapa, and then they're sort of ways of introducing the essence of particular verses, and then those verses are quoted or cited. And so they sort of lend authority to the subject matter that one meditates on. But then, the idea of, there is a sort of sense that the words themselves have a kind of, how would you describe it? A quality where they have a sort of an inspiring, you use the word blessing. Tibetans, the words themselves have a special quality that just to know and just to recite, is beneficial. That kind of thing. It's very interesting because in the Lamrim Chenmo combines the two, especially in the sections on the paramitas, where it gives the divisions. So, for instance, there's 3 kinds of morality, and where it's describing the 3 kinds of morality, or the 3 kinds of patience, or the 3 kinds of effort. It uses the language that's in the Bodhisattva Bhumi, but then in describing how to practice them, it will cite the verses from the Bodhicharya Avatara. So in that sense, the two are, very much complementary. The idea of there being 3 separate vehicles, and they're kind of unrelated spiritual paths. So you're either on one of them or you're on another one, and they are distinct, and each one sort of is a separate road to its own destination. and they have a certain finality to them individually. The notion of a single vehicle is that while those three path systems are acknowledged and followers of them, as engaging in practices that relate to them, are accepted, the idea is that they're all ultimately going to lead to Buddhahood itself. So in that sense, they aren't separate, spiritual paths. When you hear about this, it's sort of, I don't think it always clicks what the implications of that distinction really are. It doesn't really strike you what that means. The typical example is the allegories that are in, for instance, the Lotus Sutra of the householder who has a child, and he has the carts, or he has a goat cart and an elephant cart and a horse cart, I think, something like that. And those are toys, but being a child, the person does not make a distinction between the sort of the fact that these are sort of just playthings, but then there are actual real carts and out there. So the allegory goes that at some point the father takes the child out and he sees the real charts and has some kind of epiphany, recognizing that these are sort of not, they don't represent separate systems, but depending on a person's disposition, you might be more interested in one or the other. But at some point, you realize that there's really only one final goal. There's another one, I think it's also in the Lotus Sutra, of a traveler, and that the guide is, in order not to allow or to prevent the people that he's guiding from becoming discouraged, he tells them that their destination is not far off. It's kind of like a kid in a car. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Kind of thing. And the idea is you're not there yet, but this will sort of keep you from losing interest or becoming discouraged. But what strikes me about it, and it's something that I discovered in a passage from Chandakirti's poem recently, is that it really means that this one vehicle system says we're all going to become Buddhas. We're all going to become Buddhas, and there's no doubt about that. Some of us may not be inclined right now, but at some point we presumably will. And regardless of which one of these three vehicles we may set out on, ultimately we're all destined to come to the one and only true spiritual end, which is enlightenment itself. So that's a pretty radical idea, and kind of strikingly different from the three vehicle model. The Yogacara view sets out that these three, every Mahayana tradition accepts that it's possible to achieve nirvana. It's possible to end samsaric existence. The question is, well, what happens if that's in fact the path that you follow? Is that sort of it in terms of your spiritual, attainment? So, as a Mahayana tradition, the Yogacarans say, depending on your disposition, if that's kind of the thing that matters the most to you, and that's the only thing that you will pursue, then that in fact is your final destination. And they say that for the individual who only seeks nirvana, Hinayana nirvana, or liberation from samsaric existence, then that person's spiritual life is done, so to speak, and they're gone after that, in a sense. And then the Mahayanas is somebody totally different, who is seeking a goal where they will reach a point where by becoming a Buddha, then they're in a dynamic place where their nirvana is one which is active and which still has an effect on those of us who are still in samsara. But they're totally unrelated in the Yogacara view as a Mahayana perspective. But the Ekayana view is you may end up in this temporary nirvana, but it's only temporary. Maybe a long temporary, but eventually you're going to have to re-emerge from that state and set out for the one true goal.